Welcome back to Learn Astrology with Mary. My name's Mary English. You find me at www.maryenglish.com, maryenglish.co.uk and UK Astrologer. Today, as promised last week, I went to the astrological conference and came across some fabulous people. And this is fabulous person number one. We're going to be speaking with Margaret Gray today, who is a psychological astrologer. So tell me, Margaret, what's the difference between an ordinary astrologer and a psychological one?
Well, I'm actually both a psychological and a relationship astrologer. Kind of in latter years, I specialize more in relationship astrology with a psychological background. I guess the big difference, Mary, is, and thank you, by the way, for inviting me here. I'm delighted to be here. I think the main difference is really that psychological astrology is not predictive. So it really takes a deep dive into the individual's personality, their characteristics, their traits, and it looks at the transits more as an internal journey, which may be expressed externally, which also, of course, there are circumstances and events, but the main purpose is not the prediction of an exact event.
Okay, yeah, well, I don't do heaps of prediction either, so that's music to my ears. Lovely jubbly. Not to say that, because actually it does quite annoy me when people expect, well, not annoy is the wrong word, when people expect an astrologer to make zillions of predictions. It's like, eek. Yeah, I think we could toss a coin for that. So you are highly qualified, okay? So you've got a BA in counselling and psychotherapy from Ireland. You've got a primary degree in sociology, and you've got an MSW clinical social work from USA. So you've got also astrological qualifications. You've been on the board of quite a few different astrological organisations. So you've got a very full CV, shall we say? And then I also noticed that you're Irish slash Italian. So where do you identify most?
Oh, that's a hard one. By the way, the qualifications is really because I'm old, Mary. So, as we accumulate things, it's more to do with age than anything else. And Irish Italian, it's interesting because it's hard to fit in both places. So I find I kind of don't really fit in very much anywhere completely. And I spent 17 years in the UK and I spent 11 years in the US, in fact, longer. So I'm kind of a nomad. I've got Sag IC and I just find I don't really belong anywhere. I kind of feel like more I belong with different tribes of people.
Mhm.
I can be a little bit like a chameleon in terms of fitting into certain groups, but in terms of where home is, I guess Ireland is the place that feels most like home. But I would never define myself as just Irish because I don't fully fit in with that. So
Mhm.
it's that strange experience of the more you move, the more you kind of ship shape. And also, the awful thing that happens is that my grammar is appalling because I've got Irish English, English English, American English. So when I'm writing something, thank goodness for AI, as we talked
Mhm.
about at the conference, as a linguistic tool,
Mm.
it's really, really helpful because my grammar is all over the place.
Mhm. And you were born in Ireland? Question mark.
Yes, I was born in Ireland, Italian mother who came to Ireland after she married my father, but my first language was actually Italian rather than English because
Wow.
mother didn't have any English. This is many, many years ago.
Mm.
So I learned English and then went to school and had to really catch up.
Mhm. And so you grew up speaking Italian?
Yes, in the home we spoke Italian. My father, being Irish, he had learned Italian, but it wasn't so fluent because he learned it as an adult. So I was the go-between, really translating from one parent to the other, which is
Oh.
pretty much in a way what I do as a psychotherapist and as an astrologer. So it's interesting how that happens.
And we talked a little bit at the conference itself because we were sat there waiting for the rooms to open,
Yep.
etc. And you've got a Virgo ascendant, is that right?
Yes.
And the sun is in Aries. Okay, so Virgo ascendant ruled by Mercury, so communication is very important for you. And then all of the work that you've done is about communication, because I noticed one of the other jobs that you've had is like sorting out diversity for organizations, which takes a really, you've got to be a good communicator. And then if you've grown up in an environment where you've got two parents that are totally different cultures, you know, well, I don't know that Italian and Irish is that different, but they are different languages, if nothing else.
Yes.
So you've had to like translate and talk with each parent and stuff. Do you find that you have to do that because you work with couples? So you're going to have to in your couples work speak the language of each person. Is that right?
That's absolutely right. And it's so much more than just translating what somebody said. It's really also the tone and the meaning behind it. So with Mercury in Pisces, I'm constantly reading between the lines and trying to get to the deeper meaning and translate the feeling behind it. So it's like if my father would say to my mother, "Can you pass me the salt?" If I just translated that, pass me the salt, my mother might say, get the salt yourself. But if I say, hey, do you mind just, passing dad the salt? Whole different
Mm-hmm.
interpretation and whole different nuance. And the same in couples therapy. And I trained in emotionally focused therapy with couples, which is all about feelings and needs. So it's helping them translate. So to kind of highlight the good things as well, because sometimes somebody says, oh yeah, my wife did or my partner did this, and I loved it. I really was moved by that. And the other person can skip over it because they just can't hear it. So to stop them and say, hey, did you hear what your partner just said? That's kind of pretty amazing. How do you feel about that? So it's that constant dancing with that, or in the chart to really highlight with it with synastry or with the composite chart to highlight, hey, that's your partner's moon talking, which is very different to your moon. Well, what do you think about that? Well, how does that feel to you? So that's really my favorite thing about bringing together the psychotherapy and the relationship astrology, because I think the chart depersonalizes those dynamics and makes it so much easier for people to hear when they're talking about their moon or their Mars or their Mercury, rather than saying, you're a cold person and you're very detached and you're totally avoidant and you really don't care about me.
Mm. And so do you have to give little lessons to your clients in astrology before you start working with them? I mean, do your clients come to you that have an understanding of astrology, or are they completely not versed in it?
I've got three hats, Mary. I've got
Mhm.
just the psychotherapy, just the astrology, and then both together. With just the psychotherapy, I ask clients permission to look at their charts. They sign the contract. If they give me permission, I use the charts totally in the background. I don't bring them into the session.
Mhm.
If the clients ask me to do relationship astrology, usually one or both have some astrological knowledge, but often it's one person that has it. That's why they're interested in it. So if the other person doesn't, then I really bring it in a very basic way. So I might say, well, the moon, in your chart is about emotions, and your partner's moon really loves communication, needs to chat. That's how they get comfort. And your moon in Pisces really is kind of more feeling based. So what is the bridge? And that's what I always talk about, is the bridge between these differences. So I really simplify it to a very basic level. Obviously, if they're both astrologers, then we can talk about the symbolism of it. But I'm always careful because astrology brings us into our head. And if a couple is there to do work with their relationship, whether it's astrologically or psychotherapy, it's really to keep bringing them back to their feelings.
Mm-mm-mm. And so you've heard of non-violent communication?
Yes.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
I love that. A friend of mine, when I was living in Hawaii, he was doing courses in it. And he gave me a copy of the book, and I went to his class, and I just loved it. I thought it is such a wonderful tool, and I always mention it. In fact, in step one of the course that I'm doing that's coming up, I talk about Mercury. That's one of the planets I'm looking at from a relational perspective. And I mention NVC, nonviolent communication. It's wonderful because it's like tells you, you look at what's happened, you look at the impact, you look at your needs, and you look at how to ask for your needs to be met, which
Mm,
often people, we don't have the tools. Don't you wonder why that isn't taught in schools instead of algebra or alongside algebra?
mm.
Really want algebra? I mean, wouldn't it be amazing?
Yes, it would. I mean, also sort of like, wouldn't it be lovely if they taught astrology in schools, but they don't, because the first bit of learning that we have is always in the home and it's the parents. And so, one dysfunctional family is going to, oh gosh, it sounds a bit weird, breed another dysfunctional family. That sounds horrible. But if not my bad, let me start again. So if you've got an issue within a family, unless somebody gets to be self-aware enough to know that there are issues and can step away from that, then the next family is going to have equal amount of issues. The advantage I've found with astrology is that we can highlight for us where those issues might be, and then in a sense sort of forgive ourselves for it because it's, you know, part of our chart. But I think the work that you do is important because people, unless they've got that ability to, like you say, to describe their needs and what needs need to be, and it's, you can't just say to someone, oh, what's your needs, because that's not going to do it. But I've just finished reading a book with a friend of mine because we've got a teeny little book group. She's the Aries that I was telling you about because her chart's similar to yours. And we've just finished reading it. And I've heard about him before. So remind me of what his name is. It's just gone out of my head. I know he's a Libra.
Rosenberg.
Yes, yeah. And he was a Libra. He only recently died, something like 2016. But the whole
Yes.
technique is marvelous. But anyway, we won't go too
Well,
far
let
today.
me just say
Go,
one
go, go.
thing about that, if I may.
Yeah.
NVC is there's lots of resources online, and there's a wonderful list of feelings, list of needs
Mm,
that you can download. And I often send them to clients because it's amazing how many clients really, or how many individuals don't know what their feelings are. They know the main feelings, and I always start with mad, sad, glad, and afraid. But underneath that, there are so many feelings, and that list is wonderful. And I suggest to people, and for anybody listening to this, it's
mm.
a great exercise to do on a daily basis. Tick off the words that kind of resonate with you and notice how during the day those words may change. And it's a great exercise to do with a partner, with a significant other, because you can both show each other your lists and it really helps the other person to get an understanding of your feelings.
Mm. Because people take things personally, though. Like if somebody says, "Oh, you know, I didn't like the way you did that," then the other person always sort of is on the defensive side. And this is a lot about what he talks about. You know, first of all, if there'll be this sort of defensive thing until you reach this stage, like you say, when you're talking about, well, because it's, you know, you're feeling sad or depressed doesn't really tell the other person what's going on for you. So yes, I've seen that list. I didn't realize there were so many words.
There,
Wow.
aren't there a huge amount of words? And it's so amazing because it's really increasing people's feeling vocabulary, which is crucial in intimate relationships. And people forget that. And even though, of course, some charts are very airy and earthy, so they have a different language, but intimacy is, I mean, it's all about feelings. So if somebody doesn't have the vocabulary, it's not that they don't want to share their feelings, they just don't know how to. They haven't got the words.
Yes, well, I have found though that if your Mercury's in a different sign to your sun sign, which is in your case, and it's a water sign, and therefore it's much slower than your sun sign, people like with a combo like yourself need some time for their thoughts to catch up with their feelings. Yeah. So if you've got fire sign, sun sign, and fire sign Mercury, you can describe how you feel much more quickly. Yeah. If your Mercury's in a inverted commas slower sign to your sun sign, it can take a bit of time to catch up. And then in relationships, there's this combo where one person is different sun sign, different Mercury, the other person's different sun sign, different Mercury. There's lots of conversation going on. No one's feeling heard. That's where the translation needs to come in place. So you can look like, oh, well, actually, even though your Mercury squares this, it makes a nice sextile to that. So if you talk in this way, maybe you'll feel more heard. I like the fact that astrology can allow us that as a means to get out of jail card type of thing.
Absolutely. And the moon is so important because the needs of the moon, the emotional, how we perceive emotions and how we express them comes so much through the moon in terms of how we describe them, how we experience them. So moon in water is so different to a moon in air or a moon in earth. And I think that's so important for couples to understand. And to me, the three kind of things that I look at so much immediately in relationship are not so much Venus and Mars, but more the
Mm,
moon, Mercury, and Saturn, because
yes.
Saturn are boundaries,
Mm,
and those are crucial. So I think that's where it's so important to understand. I remember years ago, I had a client who I was teaching astrology too, and initially when I didn't I didn't really know their chart that well, whatever, I would say to them, how are you feeling today? Just a simple question. And they would have rabbits in the headlights eyes because they had no water in their chart whatsoever.
Mhm.
And so we used to laugh about this. And I used to tease this client. And that was my first question, always just to, whatever. And then, of course, I know that, when there's no water in the chart, that is not the question to ask somebody. You have to go around another element to reach the water.
Mm.
So you might go around, I might go around the air. What are your thoughts or what's happening today? So it's really ways around to reach. And similarly with couples, to teach them how to bridge those gaps,
Mm.
ways that work, in ways that rather than one person saying, well, this is how I am, so I assume the other person is the same as me. They're not, they're totally different.
Mm.
So what are the bridges I can help them create?
Love that word. You've used it more than once. Bridges, like that. That's nice.
I think it's really crucial because sometimes people, couples are like, well, we're so different, it's not going to work. We're all different. So it depends on it depends on the developmental stage. It depends what, where you're at in life, depends how much energy, because some bridges take hard work. They all take work, but some take more work than others. So it depends if people are invested enough.
Mm.
And I will say to couples, it's interesting, this came up at the conference at the weekend that I was saying one of the first questions I was asked couples is, do you love the other person? Because if that isn't there, then why put all the work in? It
Mm.
becomes much harder. So love doesn't solve everything, but it really is a huge bridge,
Mm.
with differences. So that is, and it's an interesting question
Wow,
because
what do people answer if they say if they say no, I don't love them? You think, well, why would they even go to a session? Do people ever say that?
well, they people might say I've great respect, I'm really fond, I really care about them. We've been together a long time. We
Oh.
have a lot in common. There are a lot of ways around that question. And some people
Mm.
are just like, oh, yeah, absolutely. Of course, I love this person. They drive me crazy, but I love them.
Mm.
And it's amazing how many people don't say that and do not say love. And so then we start exploring, why are you here? Absolutely.
Mm.
What brings you here? And some couples, of course, are couples or whatever are together for other reasons. There's companionship, there is friendship, they want to stay together. But to me, that's something very important because if one person has deep love for the other person, but the other person never has had, or maybe it's gone, love can leave the room.
Mm.
It makes it really, really hard. And they're painful sessions for clients, very, very painful.
And how do you look after yourself in situations like that?
Well, I have supervision. I mean, I have a
Mm.
wonderful supervisor who I've worked with for many years, and he's absolutely fabulous. So I go to my own supervision because that's the only place where I can bring confidential matters, of course.
Mm.
And plus, I go out in nature. I live right across the road from the sea, so I go to the sea, I go to the pool to swim. Water is really where I go in nature. So yeah, absolutely. And I do meditation and I do energy work and clear off energies and so on. Yeah, it's important. But you know, sometimes of course it sticks a little bit. It takes more work because there's people's pain right there,
Mm.
present, and it needs acknowledging. So the important thing is that it's not my pain, so I
Mm.
don't need to take it on. And that's what I love with couples work because the work is between, the relationship is really between them.
Mm.
And one of my favorite moments, I probably shouldn't say this on air because it'll happen more, but is when a couple gang up on me and they forces and I get so excited and they're looking at me and then apologizing and I'm like, no, that's great. You're working as a team.
Mm.
That's wonderful because that's when they've connected together as a team.
Mm. Yes, it's I don't work with couples. I work one-on-one. I've only done a few sessions with couples, and then I sort of thought, actually, it doesn't. I'm not really qualified to do that because yeah, but I do work one-on-ones. But couples, yeah, interesting when they gang up. On the therapist, but you can do that when when you're going to a counsellor anyway. Like you one day I've been to see mine. It's like oh, she's like my mother and I hated her. And another time she's like my. I told her. I said you really set something off in me. You're like my headmistress at school. This was a headmistress at a Catholic school who absolutely hated me. And I told this is my homeopath now, not my counsellor. But I said to her, I said, oh yeah, that really came up for me that you were Sister Amelia was her name. It's like. But anyway, I shared it with her, so that sort of helped. But I think sometimes when people go into astrology, astrology is sort of on a borderline between lots of other different types of therapy. But in and of itself, people, when they go to a session and you're a beginner astrologer, which wasn't in my case because I also was trained to be a homeopath and I was doing counselling skills training, but it can be quite difficult to begin with sort of that comes into the room some sort of issue that you might not be qualified to deal with. Now, I make sure when I teach astrology that people have resources that they can go to, and also to recognise that the astrologer might not be qualified to then deal with whatever might be coming up in the room. They can look at the astrology of it, but there's qualifications for that. And I firmly believe, and it was Liz Greene that said this, not me personally, but to a group of people. She said anybody that's going to be an astrologer needs at the very minimum to have counselling skills training, not necessarily to be a counsellor, that's different, but to have counselling skills training as a minimum, bare min. And I thought, yeah, until so, oh yes, you do, because so much will come up in the room: child abuse, parents being nasty to them when they're little, la 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 la. And you just, when you're first interested, and I'm not talking personally now, but when people are first interested in astrology, they have this vision in their mind, I'm going to be working with people and it'll all be fine. But it's amazing when you lift the sort of the lid, so to speak, and your Pandora's box and stuff comes out, how much can be revealed. And I think it's important for beginner astrologers, who I mostly aiming this podcast to, is that is something very much to keep in mind, that the conversation and the work needs to happen to the level of the skill that you have.
Absolutely. And also, I studied with Liz Greene and she told us on day one, she said, if you want to do this course at the CPA, you need to be in your own therapy. There's no, that's just a given. And I think it's true because we can only bring clients as far as we've gone. So we cannot go any further if it's something we don't know about. And I think I also have a list of resources. So if people come to me, for example, for financial queries, I always say to them, I'm not a financial astrologer.
Mm.
But I do have some wonderful colleagues like Christine Skinner and Ray Merriman in the States, whatever, that I can refer you to. So similarly with medical astrology, I will not touch medical issues. I always say I'm not a medical practitioner in any which way. So I cannot help you. And people find that hard sometimes because they push.
Mm.
It's like, but, can you say anything? And I'm like, no, I said it would be unethical for me to say anything. And also it could be really incorrect. So I have a list of medical astrologers that I would send them to. So I think it's very important. And I think for anyone practicing psychological astrology, that's really putting up a shingle saying, I have the resources, the experience, the qualifications to deal with psychological issues. So, by its very title, people will come to me with deeper issues that, they want to process and untangle. And I do offer astrological counseling also on a one-to-one for people who want to continue to work and keep their chart. Whoops. And they really want to work with their chart and the transits as they're going through it. So
Mm.
yes, my desk is so chaotic here. If I touch anything, it falls down. So
So if
that's
we hear
all.
some clunks, I know what it is.
Exactly, yes.
So
It's
tell me,
funny.
how did you first get into astrology? Where was astrology in? I mean, if you're growing up in Ireland, there's not going to be an awful lot of astrology happening. So what was the beginning of your astrological journey? Talk me through it. So how did you even hear the word astrology and know what it meant?
Sure. I mean, there is actually quite a bit of astrology going on in Ireland. But I did not start it here because I was living in the UK at the time, in Bristol, in fact. And there was an evening class that was advertised by an astrologer called Cate Reidy Birthwell, who was also studying Jungian analysis. So she advertised it as a psychological astrology class. Now, to preface that, my aunt in Italy was an astrologer. I didn't actually know that. She's since passed away. But I started becoming interested in astrology about maybe 4 or 5 years before I did Kate's class. So I started reading books, and in those days there were no computer programs to draw up charts. I am awful at maths, so my charts were all awful. I mean, it was just a disaster. So when I started the class, a friend of mine had just given me, I think, her old Amstrad computer, an electric ephemeris that I used, those little discs. So that was fantastic. So then I saw Kate's class. I was going through a breakup. I was feeling really down. I thought, let me do something for myself. And from the first night, I loved it. I was hooked. I
Mm,
went to her class for, I think it was 6 years. We started gathering in people's homes and had class
hmm
week. The week after I had major surgery, I hobbled along and went because I wasn't going to miss a class. This is in days before we did recordings or anything. So if you weren't there, you missed it. At the end of these 6 years, she finally turned around to us and in very Kleinian fashion, she said, "You have sucked my breast dry, all of you. You now need to move to a formal course." I'll never forget it. We were like, what? So then I did the 3 year CPA course, but all of my basic training was with Kate. And I remember the first night, it was very interesting. She told us all to bring our charts and put them in an envelope, a plain white envelope. She then got us to swap the charts and she got us to hold that envelope and get an intuitive feeling for what that chart might be like
Without even opening the envelope.
without opening
Right.
the envelope. And we all started doing it and we discovered we did. And so that was also the start of me really developing my intuition because up to then it was like, what? No. And Kate later told us she is very psychic herself. And so this was also an integral part of the astrology training I got. And it was just fascinating. And
Mm,
I've done that exercise since when I did classes in person with students, with beginners in Dublin. I used to do that exercise halfway through it, not at the start, but it's always a very interesting exercise. And
mm.
I really believe we're all intuitive.
Oh, yes.
It's
Yes.
just that we don't tend to know how to use it or what to do with it. And that was just such a great exercise. So that was really how my training was. And later, as I said, I discovered my aunt was an astrologer. She was in her 80s when I discovered that. So we used to talk about astrology. She was in Italy and she used Black Moon Lilith a lot, which I didn't. So we used to have great, interesting discussions. She also used tarot cards, which I'm not very good at using other than for myself. But I'm seeing more and more of the younger astrologers putting together tarot and astrology, which is fantastic. I'm so excited. My aunt used to do that years ago in Italy. So she was the one who sent me the first, handwritten copy of my chart, which was
Mhm.
really, really amazing. So that was my journey into astrology.
Mm. Yes, my auntie was an astrologer, but I didn't know that too much about it. And I thought she'd told me that I'd got Gemini in my first house. I haven't, I've got Gemini in the 10th, but I got Moon in Gemini, but I'd misheard what she said. I knew she said house and something. But yes, my older sister and my younger sister used to talk astrology with her, but I never did because I couldn't do astrology to start with. It looked too complex and I can't do maths. And I just thought it's a circle. All I could see, and then when there were people using them, it's just a circle with numbers and things on it. What's it all mean? I didn't get into astrology until computer programs were invented, and it gave you the analysis. I got a £10 CD from one of the one of those computer shops, and it was called Zodiac, and I loaded it into my little PC, had a little laptopy thing, loaded it into that, and you'd click on it and it'd go, Moon in the something something house means blah de blah. It was marvellous. The bloke who wrote it, I found out afterwards, the fellow that had written the computer program was an author, but not an astrologer, and he obviously was using astrology books to do the analysis. And they were very pretty little charts, and they were reasonably accurate actually, and I used that for absolutely years until I discovered the website astro.com. And I think it's nice that, yeah, your auntie, my auntie, because we're born in the same year, not too far apart.
Yes,
It's your
that's
auntie and my
exactly.
auntie who got us into. But that wasn't what got me into astrology. It was my homeopath. that said, oh, that must have happened during your Saturn return. I didn't know what a bloody Saturn return was. So what's she talking about? So that's, that was what got me into, I must find out what she means. Um,
It's also interesting, Mary, that both you and I, when we were born similar, our charts are quite similar,
mm,
that we both have kind of two professions, and I've got
yes.
Gemini MC. So I have the psychotherapy and astrology, and I've done mediation as well, but I didn't really do as much work as with the psychotherapy. So all my life, there's always been two things alongside each other, just like you with the homeopathy and the astrology. And I remember Liz Greene again saying years ago that she said, don't just get immersed in astrology and ignore the rest of the world and think. She said, the more you develop other skills and the more you know about the arts and authors and writing, and the more you travel and so on, it's all going to feed your astrology. And I always remember that. And my MC in Gemini was so happy. It was like, great, this is perfect to study a ton of other things and to explore a ton of other things.
Yeah, I've got Moon in Gemini, but my MC's actually in Taurus. So my job's,
Oh, okay.
yeah, this job that I've got, which is combined of lots of different things because the Moon in Gemini, but my MC's actually, yeah, it's in Taurus. So I've been in the same field of work for 30 something years now. Oh, shouldn't have sighed like that. That was a big sigh. That wasn't a sigh like I hate my work. It's just that I have done it for a long amount of time. Because that's what was nice about the conference was seeing people that had just got into astrology and really excited about it. I love
Yeah.
that. And that's why I like teaching it. When people have just got into it, they're really excited about it. They want to know what it all means. Because it is a lot to learn. That's the other thing why you can't just suddenly launch yourself into astrology, even with an app, even with a computer program. There's still so much to learn. There's the planets, there's signs, the angles, the aspects, there's the symbols for the signs of the zodiac, the symbols for the planets. There is a lot to learn. Whilst things like cards, which I've also done since I was 14, are easier, and they've generally got either one or two meanings, like either the right way up or the wrong way up. Whilst astrology, there can be so many different things. Like Venus isn't just about love; it can also be about your finances, type of thing. So there's more than one meaning, and that drives beginner astrologers crazy. Because an older astrologer will go, oh yes, 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 and they're going, oh well, so that's. I have used keywords with people, but we're talking today about you, Margaret, and your life. So you get into astrology and stuff. So how do you think astrology has altered? Do you think computer programs and being able to do things more quickly has helped or hindered our profession?
I think the wonderful thing about computer programs, I use Solar Fire and I love it. And it just avoids me having to do the calculations. But because I used to do calculations by hand, it means that I have a sense if something is incorrect, because of course all programs sometimes go wrong. So that's really helpful. I think my concern a little bit with astrology at the moment is that there's a lot on the internet, but it's not always correct and it doesn't go to any great depth. I think the internet can be used for me to learn the basic language of astrology, which, as you say, is complicated. And a lot of people get put off by that. But I think on the internet, they can find out the basic language and learn it. I used to do cards for students, on like Venus and for myself when I was learning, and then the houses. So I used to have, in fact, a folder, and I used to have a section for the houses, section for the planets, a section for the signs. And I used to write in all kinds of comments on it as I learned. And I always encourage students to do that on the internet, look up all the different variations. But I always say, please look up reputable sites, look up experienced astrologers, because with AI, there's a lot of incorrect information. So they're going to end up wasting their time and energy on something that's incorrect. There's also a lot of pop astrology, which is really fun and great. But if people are going through a tough transit and then they read something where somebody says, oh, yeah, you've got this planet on this, so you might die, that stops being fun. That is really seriously unethical, and people get really scared. And people think, oh my goodness, I'm going to get a serious illness, or my relationship is going to break up. The amount of times couples come to me and say, oh, I've got this transit on, the composite descendant. Does that mean we're going to split up? Because they've read it online. And I'm like,
Oh,
no, there's a change, but the
mm,
change could be the birth of a child, or it could be that you commit even more to each other. It could be just that you need a little bit of space from each other.
mm,
So I think information online doesn't take into consideration the context, which is why I think people ideally need to learn at a live class, especially as beginners, a live class where they ask questions.
mm,
And Yvonne Smith Tarnas and I ran a psychological astrology introductory class for several years. Now, Yvonne is very busy with her Jungian work, but we did it live. We did record it, but we did it live so people could ask questions.
mm,
And because it's very, very important to
mm,
say, I'm kind of panicking because I see this in my chart. Does it mean this? So they need reassurance. They need, so I think, or they need to go to a site where there is really good professional information. So
mm,
AI, I think the panel discussion was great that
mm,
Victor put together. I really enjoyed it. I loved being on the panel. But as I said on the panel, AI doesn't have a heart. It may have a mind, an adaptation of a mind, but it may pretend to have a heart, but it doesn't. And
mm,
so it doesn't join the dots in the same way as humans do.
mm, mm, mm.
That's my take.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree with that. I also thought what was interesting about being at the conference was actually literally being in the room with people. I mean, we're talking and you're across the sea to where I am, and we're still managing to communicate. It's definitely not the same as being in the room with someone. And I have built my practice on seeing people face to face, but with the pandemic couldn't, and I've continued to do that. And I was contemplating, I do some readings now, not as well, yeah, I could do some astrology readings that are face to face. There's such a big difference, because online all you see is the upper body. You don't see the feet. You just see this part of the person. And have we become too used to just seeing that top half of the person and not all of them? So there's that to take into account as well. But I think I never would have learned astrology if the internet hadn't been invented and computer programs had been invented, merely for the fact that I'm no good at maths at all. So I don't have a problem with the internet. I don't have a problem with computer programs. I don't have too much of a problem with AI. What I do have a problem with is that other organizations that are going to use these things and try and, I don't know, what's the word? Um, and my worry with AI is going to be used for the wrong purposes. I mean, part of the discussion about AI was what's it going to be used for? Because the idea is it seems to be making things that much easier, but it's not. But yeah, we can have too much information. And okay, so one question I need to ask you, not that
Let
it makes
me,
any
let
difference.
me, let
Go
me
on,
just go back.
go,
Sorry for
go.
what you said. I was smiling to myself because I thought there's your Taurus MC versus my Gemini MC. My Gemini MC loves seeing people online. A, because I can, we can connect across the globe, and B, because I can see people's eyes and what they're communicating through their eyes. Whereas if I'm in a room with somebody, I can't really stare at their eyes in the same way because I think, what is going on here? So it's interesting that you want to see the body and the feet. There's your Taurus MC.
Yeah,
Isn't
yeah,
it wonderful? I love that. I just wanted to say that.
yeah.
Sorry.
That's very, a
Continue.
very good observation. Yeah, it's just there was just too much worry about the pandemic to meet people face to
I,
face.
I
Uh,
haven't gone back to seeing anybody face to face. I have just stayed online because, um, I found partially it was practical that by the time I drove to the location, had an office, whatever, and the stress of driving, I just found I wasn't as relaxed. At home, I feel like I'm much more grounded. I'm relaxed. I can do a meditation in between clients. I'm not seeing one person after the other. There's a little gap. Also, I'm getting to see clients in their home environment or how they are. So
mm.
much more relaxed. And of course, I mean, we're much more aware of neurodivergence at the moment. And so for neurodivergent clients, they're usually much more comfortable behind a screen and find it much easier to share about themselves behind a screen. So that's been a huge plus. But sorry, I know you were going to ask me a question. I'm going off on a tangent
No,
here.
no, 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 no. I quite agree. But yeah, see, I don't see it like I think actually I don't have an office anymore. I visit people in their homes. I've got a little motorbike and I'll zoom around there. Or this is now, I visit them in their homes. I do home visits, or I visit them in their hotel room if they're visiting Bath. That's the only two places, because I don't rent a room anymore and I don't want people coming to the house anymore. We've got a rescue doggy and my husband's got a heart problem and don't want things coming into the house. So I'm quite happy to go and visit people in other locations. Yeah, the other question I was going to ask you is that you've been working for this considerable amount of time and you've used astrology and used in your psychotherapy as well. So do you feel that astrology has assisted yourself? I'm not talking about your career now, you within yourself. Do you think astrology has allowed you to comprehend more about your own needs, etc.?
Absolutely, Mary. Oh my goodness, I have a Scorpio moon, and there is
Ah.
nothing else, no other tool that will explain the experience of having a Scorpio moon like astrology. So as soon as I started studying astrology and understanding about my moon and all the water in my chart, it was like this huge sigh of relief of like, okay, that's why I feel things so intensely.
Mhm.
And it really made an enormous difference to my life of how I am, of how I operate in the world, of what my needs are, of how to really try and use my chart at its best potential. Because I think we have, as astrologers, we try to see the best potential of the chart and to reflect that back to the client. And with ourselves as well, it's a constant work in progress where we're working with our chart to be ourselves. And I think for me, the gift of astrology is that, and I always say this to clients, all we need to be is ourselves, the best, most expansive possible version of our chart. We don't need to be anything different. If I'm an Aries, why would I try to be a Scorpio or a Pisces? That doesn't make sense because people often, growing up in families where parents have expectations and demands, they're really trying to mold often a child
Mhm.
into some sort of shape. And then as adults, we're like, is there something wrong with me because I'm not like that? Because, I don't want to make cuckoo clocks like my grandfather did. I want to be a surgeon or an artist. And I think astrology gives people permission and encourages them to be who they are, to be the individuals they are. And my hope is that with Pluto in Aquarius and the transpersonals in air and fire, that is going to help younger generations to feel really strong and confident in themselves, to really feel like, you know what, not only do I have a right to be on the planet exactly as I am and not to have to twist myself out of shape, but also I am valued and appreciated for who I am. And I think that's so important because that's fundamental. If we feel that we can walk around feeling empowered, feeling good about ourselves, feeling like this is great. I don't need to be anybody else. I don't need to be my sibling, my partner, my child. I just need to be myself. And if parents encourage their children to be themselves, that's what's going to change the world ultimately because we're going to feel good. So we're not going to want to create major conflicts or put other people down or be envious of other people or use greed as a crutch for our lack of sense of self. That's just,
Mhm.
sorry, that's my little soapbox.
No, that was beautiful. I love that. I've got one last question for you, please, Margaret. So, if you were a beginner astrologer now, so I've got a lot of beginner astrologers listening, what advice would you give to your beginner astrologer self?
Well, I would say, first of all, don't give up. There is a point between the enthusiasm of starting to learn to really getting a grasp of the language of astrology where it's easy to get disheartened. It's like it feels like I want to know it all, I want to, and I can't get it, and I'll never get it. So don't give up. You've got to get over that little hump and you will be fine. When you get to the other side and the pieces start linking, so give it at least a year and a half to really begin to, but preferably 2 years. Don't give up. That's the first thing I would say. Second thing I would say is learn from a reputable astrologer, or from a reputable site. Make sure you give yourself the best chance possible. And also read as much as possible of different types of astrology. You don't need to decide. For me, I decided immediately psychological because I reverberated with it. But I always encourage my students to study traditional astrology, to study all kinds of, esoteric astrology, evolutionary astrology, try all the different kinds of astrology. you'll find the one where you settle in most, but know a little bit about all of them because also that stops competition. There is no competition. Clients go to whoever they're most suited to. And as beginners, you don't know. There could be a kind of astrology out there that might be your passion for life. It might be Vedic astrology. So I would, those are really my words of encouragement. And don't also, one third thing, don't ever be afraid to ask questions. Really, all of us as astrologers, I love it when even past students email me years later and say, hey, any advice, any suggestions? What are your thoughts? Ask questions, really important. We're constantly learning. By the way, if anybody thinks that after a course they know astrology, only really go into astrology if you want to learn till the day you drop. We are
Mhm.
all students and teachers, and that's what I love about it. None of us are experts, we're all learning, so learn from each other and ask questions.
Absolutely. Oh, Margaret, thank you very much. It's been lovely talking with you today. So we can find you at the website astrologypsychological.com, correct?
And also relationships.and astrology.com. So, yes, there's both, either you can go to whichever one you're most interested in.
And actually, you can find Margaret by just Googling Margaret Gray, Gray, astrologer, and her websites will come up pretty high. So she's on the rankings. You'll be able to find her.
Glad to hear that. I never checked myself, so thank you for.
Oh, yes, I checked.
And Mary, it's such
Yeah,
a pleasure. Since we're the same vintage in particular, it's such a pleasure. And I hope we get to meet in person again and chat. Wasn't it synchronicity meeting like that at the
it
conference, both of
was.
us arriving early? That was kind of magical, really.
It was lovely. Thank you very much. I'm going to say goodbye and we're going to sign off. So if you'd like to get in contact with Margaret, the details will be on the show notes. And it's been absolutely lovely talking with you today. Bye
You
bye
too.
now.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you.